My name's Caroline de Riviere, and I'm actually going to be off screen taking your questions and just looking after things behind the scenes. So tonight we are really excited because we've got Christina Bush and Sharon Milroy, who are going to talk to you all about assessing capacity for change. So I will hand you over to Christina and Sharon.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and my name's Chris, and we just thought we'd start by just telling you a little bit about ourselves before we get into the subject for tonight. So I've been a wellbeing practitioner, a coach, a facilitator, and a counsellor for more years than I care to mention. I think it's probably something like 30 years. And during that period of time, I have always been amazingly fascinated by the difference that makes the difference for people who have experienced traumas and challenges in their lives, and what makes it possible for them to transition through those traumas into a place where they are got the capacity to learn, to grow, and to change, and to use the experience as something really positive that underpins their the rest of their lives. And I got interested in that for a number of reasons. One, because of my dad. My dad's had 3 strokes, and I was very much part of his rehabilitation. I've also been poorly myself, so I've and I've had a rehabilitation journey of my own. So I've had that personal experience, and I've been working with clients, both large clients, as in corporates, and small groups of people. And throughout all of that work, I've had that sort of focus and attention on this journey of well-being. So Sharon and I have worked together, we've known each other for a very long time, haven't we? And we've had the pleasure of working with each other on and off on different ways. So I'm so excited tonight that we're going to be doing this together. So Sharon.
Yes, thank you. Hello, I'm Sharon Milroy, and yes, I'm a coach and facilitator. Chris and I, our paths are crisscrossed, and Chris invited me, along with Caroline, to really share some of the sort of the work passions that I have in life. So I'm deeply interested in resilience and what enables us to be resilient, to bounce back, and to have a really high level of resilience so that we overcome whatever the challenges are and the effects on our health as well. So I work as a therapist as well. My interest is really in the neuroscience of how we learn, relearn, linked to the resilience. And so as a therapist, I bring that really into my coaching practice. I'm very excited to be working with brain working recursive therapy at the moment as a new approach, and I'm a hypnotherapist as well. So we're really interested in sharing with you really the psychological aspects of maybe a patient's journey, and maybe what pieces you might want to take to add to the way that you work with patients, and that conversation that I'm sure over the coming months we're going to have. So as you know, right, I'm just going to share my screen here so you can see some slides. So as you know, you've signed up to for us to explore with you how we use the HERO framework to assess the patient's capacity for change. So HERO is a psychological framework that really looks at how people can change and develop, and we're going to build that into how you may that may add to how you structure assessment conversations around goal setting, confidence building, the resilience and optimism, and how you use that assessment results to really inform the way that you're going to work and your choice of treatments for that particular patient. So meeting them where they are, and what could you set up to help them progress and achieve what it is that they are wanting to achieve.
So if you could share the screen, Sharon, that'd be lovely, because it hasn't come up yet. So that'd be great. And while Sharon's doing that, I just really want to take you back to the start of where I started to become really, really interested in patients and their journeys. So I became really, really fascinated with this concept of the difference that makes the difference. So for me, as I said, my father's had a stroke, so I was very present with his stroke journey. I've also been very present, obviously, with my own journey, and I've been present with clients, and as I've said. So I wanted to understand what has to be true and what exists for a patient to have the capacity to learn and adapt and grow during their rehabilitation journey. And the reason I got fascinated with this was because I was working with a stroke team at the time, and we were starting to kind of explore, why is it that some patients make an incredible progress in a really short space of time, and other people really don't progress at all? And they're all given the same exercises, they're going through the same treatment plans, but what's the difference? And for me, it's always been, the difference has been the psychological difference. So we're just going to explore, and do the next slide, just to some of the things that I began to think about. So the first thing I started to think about was this. I love this model, the 4 energies, because for me, it's a really great way of sort of explaining how we bring all of our energies together around a particular focus. So if I go back to the story of my father had 3 strokes, and he was unable to, he had a stroke right down the left hand side of his body. So he was absolutely struggling to move, and he was very frustrated, and he was very angry. And at that stage, I was very early on in my counselling training, and I thought I'd try and support my dad a bit with his journey. And so what I started to discover then was, well, okay, what happens when we start with a focus around purpose and this sense of spiritual purpose? My dad was a great gardener. He loved gardening, and his whole aim was to get back outside and in some way, shape or form being able to interact with the plants and the soil in his garden. He was passionate about that. So he had a really clearly defined reason, a why for his rehabilitation. We then moved to his emotions, and my dad was on an up and down journey, when one day he was up and the next day he was deeply, deeply depressed. And what I realised at that stage was, if I could introduce positive emotions, and I did that through our neighbour's dog, and I did that through all sorts of different things, I could induce a positive state, which then enabled and supported him to continue with his rehabilitation. We also did a lot of work around his focus and attention, and the thoughts that he was thinking, and the way he was thinking his thoughts. So very early on in my journey, I started to realise that these 4 energies were really crucial, and the capacity that we had in our different energies really supported and enabled our journey. When I started to interview stroke patients, it was the same thing, the same information was coming out. But what they talked about was 5 things. They talked about their hopefulness that there was a future and there was something better for them, and that they could set goals. They talked about their belief in themselves and how important that had been in their journey. They talked about their resilience, their ability to roll with things and come back from difficult times. And they also talked about what I've talked about a little bit before, about this positive mindset, underpinned all the time by their relationships. So once I started putting all this stuff together, I thought I'd really got something here, something really unique, until a colleague of mine, Kev, said, no, you haven't actually. There's been a huge amount of research into this already. This is called psychological capital, and it's used in organisations to support managers and leaders when they're helping their people develop resilience and strength to overcome the challenges. So although I was a little bit annoyed that it already existed, I was also very delighted, because I'm a bit of a geek, and I do like a good bit of analysis, and I do like to have all of the research. So the good news is that I actually had a really fantastic research base to build on. Sharon and I have been talking about all of these things. So we then decided that wouldn't it be great to pull all this together into this webinar that we're doing today about assessing somebody's capacity for change. So we're going to start, before we go back into psychological capital, which we will do in a minute, we thought we'd start with capacity. What is capacity?
Okay, so now you can see we have a slide here with a river on it. So my capacity is like a river. So how high is my river? Well, if my river is high as an individual, the likelihood is that the water is flowing over the stones and rocks. There's huge momentum, and linking with Chris's previous slide, there's lots of energy. And that is all going in a direction that I want it to go in. I have perspective, I know where it's going, it has flow, it has a sense of travel. On the other hand, if my river is low, then I bang into the rocks and the stones, I lose momentum, and that drains my energy. My perspective may be a bit more difficult to get from here because I can't necessarily see the direction of travel, and I might be hijacked by the sorts of barriers that are in my way, maybe things that aren't quite so important getting my attention, and maybe I don't have the energy for what is most important, what my real priorities are. So the question we would pose here is, what would it take for the river to be at a higher level, to increase the level for today and tomorrow? Because of what the energy I spend today, will there be enough that will be recharged, ready for tomorrow and the days that follow? So here we've got capacity is about moving towards what matters to me most. And so we've got three aspects here. It's about where really am I where am I directing my attention? So what's my focus? Where's my energy going? Because as we know, wherever we put our energy, where our energy flows, that's where our attention goes. So we really want to maximize and utilize our energy really well. What am I, so adapt, so what do I do now and how do I respond? And with flex, what are the new ways of being and thinking and doing and emotionally responding? So what are those three aspects? Where do I direct, adapt and flex?
So we then move on to this concept of assessing somebody's capacity. So we're assessing their capacity to how much capacity have they currently got to direct their focus, how much capacity have they got to adapt, and how much capacity have they got to flex. So we likened this, and forgive me that we've now moved to glasses rather than rivers, because I couldn't get a nice slide that actually had different levels, river levels, and it was a bit complicated. So we've moved to how full is your glass with water. So the first one we've got here is number one, where really my capacity is very low and it needs filling up. And the reason that it's low, if we go back to the analogy of my dad, when my dad had his first stroke, the capacity that he had to do anything beyond the really simple everyday things was very low, because he was frightened, he was shocked, he was experiencing all sorts of emotions. So he really didn't have any capacity to do anything more than simply get up in the morning. But as he started to come to terms with what had happened, and he really started to regain his confidence, started to really think about that there was possible for something more, he was then able to start to think about some more possibilities. He was able to shift. And as we work through, as we get more and more capacity, so we can do more and more things. So if we just flick to the next slide and just have a quick look at what this really means. So when I'm assessing somebody's capacity to direct their focus and energy, at number one, what I'm noticing is their capacity to maintain what is currently existing. So I'm really building their confidence to just be comfortable with, this is what you can achieve right here, right now. And your goals will be very small goals, but those goals will be so important because they're goals that are supporting my confidence, building my resilience, and giving me some things to be positive about. As we move through, we've got the potential and possibilities for things. Now I can direct my focus beyond now into something more, and I can start to think about the fact that there's the potential to do something more. Then I'm really moving into my commitment and my focus. Sorry, I missed the focus bit off there, but I'm moving into my commitment and focus around my goals. And then the fourth stage is when I've got lots and lots of capacity. I can really start to flex and try new things, experiment, and really grow. So I'm assessing patients' capacity to focus, and their adaptation is, in the first space, it's really about safety. It's making sure that I'm safe, and whatever exercises or things that we do with patients, the patient feels safe, and therefore they can start to build their confidence in their own capacity to keep themselves safe. I am safe. And I know that was really important with my dad in particular, because he was really frightened that he was going to keep falling over. And that was something that really scared him. So in the early days, it was really important that every time he was able to stand, even for a short period of time, I was encouraging him to really believe in his own ability. You then move through into exploring, and as I said, experimenting, and on into challenge. Thank you.
Okay, so Chris has mentioned this is a psychological capital model, and with the 4 elements of hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. And what we've done is added to it the underpinning of relationship. So when Chris was doing her research, it came up that the relationship was the difference that was also making the difference. So we've added to the psychological capital model. So psychological capital is about an individual's positive psychological state of development. And as you can see, it's got these 4 components. And what is really exciting about this is that each of these areas can be assessed, they can be strengthened, and they can be developed. And they also have links with the neuroscience space as well. So what we know is that when we work with any of these areas, so for example, if we were working with hope, we will also be helping to strengthen the other aspects as well. So being able to assess where patients are in each of these areas and to link their treatment plan, meeting them where they are and what's important to them, will strengthen the physical side as well as the psychological aspects.
Okay, so let's start with hope. So as the definition says, my positive attitude and my way of thinking about where I am and where I want to be. What's interesting about psychological capital, and in particular hope, is that we can be hopeful about one thing and hopeless about something else. Because as Sharon said, we can be hopeful about our possibility and potential for moving forward, but if we don't have our self-belief that underpins it, then that can impact our hopefulness. So you might find with, and I certainly know this with some clients who would say, I'm really hopeful that, you know, I can really progress in this area, but I absolutely can't progress in this area because of X, Y, and Z. So hope is specific to the particular thing that you're talking about. So you may be listening to patients and hearing them talk hopefully about their partners and all sorts of other things, but really carefully listening to whether they're hopeful about themselves. So what does hope consist of? Well, hope's an interesting one. So I'm hopeful that there is a better future. And I'm hopeful that there is more than this. And so when we're assessing capacity and we're at 1, the hope is very low level hope. It's the hope that there will be a tomorrow. Often there will be something that will happen tomorrow that will be better than today. But when we get to 4, the hopeful becomes something about, I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I know I'm going to do this. So we start to be able to really ramp up our dreams and hopes, depending on how much capacity and also how much support we've got from the other areas. So the important thing about hope is setting really clear outcomes and a destination. And those outcomes and destination are around the spiritual as well as the physical. So my spiritual aspirations for who I am and how I want to live my life, as well as what I'm able to do and how I'm able to think. It's about my determination. How determined am I? How resourceful am I? How able am I to find ways, to find new pathways? So it's that ability to adapt and flex. How able am I to find different ways? Because hope is about outcomes, but it's also about pathways. How do I get what I want? But also, how am I going to get there?
And moving on, if we look at efficacy or self-efficacy we have here. So if efficacy is about our ability to achieve intended results or desired results, it's underpinned absolutely by the beliefs that I hold about my capacity, my capability, and what I can learn from and with others. So this is also includes our confidence, our real conviction. It's about putting in the necessary effort to achieve, so to marshal all of our resources to achieve what it is that we want, and our beliefs will be key, or the patient's beliefs will be key to that. So maybe what have they believed about themselves in the past? What can they believe about themselves now? And so it's about knowing, as a patient, knowing myself really well, believing in my own capability, and believing that I'll find a way, maybe knowing from the past that I found my way through difficult times or challenges, and believing that, again, I still have that capability. It's about seeking support and learning from others. And so you can see here that there are great links with self-efficacy with the relationship as well, the relationship we're building with you as the therapists. Then we've got resilience. So resilience here is about the ability to bounce back. So bounce back from adversity, from uncertainty, risk or loss, and to adapt. So, you know, it may be all number of those elements for the particular patient. There's also something here about being able to bounce back and over time being able to go beyond as well. So maybe the things that are really important to the person as they work through their own recovery and maximise what they're capable with, maybe they've gone beyond what they used to be able to do because something is so important to them. So here we are with resilience. It's about really facing the reality, and that can include things like how they pace themselves. So that comes back to sort of the energy battery idea, really, making sure that I'm recharging. It's about finding meaning and purpose. So you can see how this links here with hope. It's about having what's really important, being able to improvise, and being flexible and able to adapt. So all of those around what can they take from what they've been able to do in the past that they can still do, and how can they find new pathways to achieve what's important.
And finally, it's the optimistic mindset. So this is about my positive mindset now, and it's different because from hope, because this is the emotional and the mental capacity. So the way that I choose to think about things, do I choose to think about something as a positive experience, even though it was challenging, or do I choose to think of it as something absolutely catastrophic that I really can't return from? So it's how I think about it, and also how I interact with my emotions. So am I feeling positive when I've achieved something, or am I going, well, I was just lucky that time, wasn't it? It's not something that's going to happen to me again. And I start to feel really, really low and really down. So positive mindset is made up of a number of elements. The first thing is this underlying sense that it will be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. So I know that I will come through this and I will be okay, whatever that okay may be. And that's for me to decide. And obviously, sometimes it's about my physical limitations, but I know I will be okay, and I will be able to continue living my life and making the most from my life. And we see that often with patients, don't we, who really go, do you know what? I know I've been debilitated. I know I can't walk, but I'm still able to do all of these things. And actually, I'm still really enjoying my life. Able to reframe is really important. It's able to reframe the tragedy and the difficulties and the pain into something that we can find a positive sense of our own strength, our own capability, all sorts of other things that we can really reframe. The other thing that's also really difficult sometimes when we're talking with patients who've been through such catastrophic experiences, finding gratitude. Because and there's lots of science, and Sharon and I, if you choose to come and do some stuff with us in the future, we'll go into a lot around the science, the neuroscience of being in a grateful gratitude place. But when we can find the ability to be grateful for even the smallest thing, that can really have a massive impact on our capacity to continue and to do things and to grow. And there's also lots of research into awe and awareness. So awe leads to awareness. If we can pay attention and experience awe in just the smallest thing, even like a flower, and feel those positive emotions, we can then start to become, it opens up potential and possibility and awareness for something more. The positive focus is paying attention to where things are going well, the things that are beautiful and lovely in life, rather than focusing on all the terrible calamities. Because as we know, if we spend too much time thinking about difficulties, we just become those difficulties. And an optimistic mindset is also the real absolute knowing that there is the possibility for adaptation and flexibility. I know I can adapt, and I know that I can flex, and I know that it will be all right. I just don't necessarily know how yet. And that's so important in anybody's rehabilitation journey. Okay, so let's pop to the next slide. So we imagine ourselves really as facilitators, and we also imagine therapists and anybody working with patients as a facilitator of this psychological capital. So although it's obviously the patient's responsibility and they're responsible for their own feelings and emotions, it's our responsibility to create the environment and the context within which patients can increase their capacity in those 4 areas of hopefulness, self-efficacy, resilience, and optimism. So when a patient is in that first step, that first place where they're really just focusing on their here and now and survival, the really important thing for us to do as facilitators is to listen, to understand. Understanding the way the patient holds their world. If we hear for hope, we're listening for hopefulness. We're listening for their self-belief. We're listening for the times when they say, gosh, that was a successful time in my life. We're encouraging them to find the times in their lives where things have gone well for them. The next stage is really to begin to observe. I'm noticing that you've been so successful in that. You've repeated that a number of times. And that's something that I really notice, and encouraging the patient to notice for themselves, and then to very gently begin to be able to explore beyond what is true for them now. And the third thing is to encourage experimentation in a really safe and beautiful way for patients to really be able to flex. And the final area is to inspire and to challenge. Because if we want to grow beyond, we need somebody who totally believes we can, and who's really inspiring, and who can support us as we transition from experimenting into setting that wondrous goal of, yes, I'm going for Kilimanjaro, I can do it. And whilst I don't seem to have all of the resources right here, right now, you and I believe in my ability to find those resources and to achieve my goals.
And picking up on what Chris has talked about there, are some of these elements that she's referred to. So there's a huge state of curiosity. So being really curious about what's going on for the person, in observing and listening to them, really stepping into their world. So what's their sort of mental map? What's their map of the world? How do they see things? What's true for them? And how might their world be different from your own? So really understanding their structure, their internal structure, what goes on for them, what things mean, and what's maybe what they're noticing, just as Chris said, but also what they are noticing. What do they pay attention to? And yes, how do they structure what's going on, their internal structure, as well as what's going on in their lives. So understanding their why, because that will again give you insights into what's important, and understanding their how. So how do they go about something, and being able at a fine level to notice what again might make the difference with them. So as we pick up on the listening, it's really about listening to what's said as well as what's not said, so what's unsaid, and looking for congruence here. So as the person portrays either verbally and non-verbally, how congruent is their message? Now, with whatever's going on with their physicality, what can you detect in terms of how congruent the message is? And you may be picking that up in terms of their language and their tone and the facial expressions and colouring. So whatever is the mixture and how congruent is what they're saying or not saying. And then linguistically listening out for the clues of potential limiters. So words like can't, and shouldn't and mustn't. So yes, how does this, what's the tune that they're playing? How does it sound? And what else does it give you?
So we're going to move on to how do I sort of start to find this stuff out? So for me, the first thing is, in my mind, I've actually got those 4 headings now really firmly fixed. So I'm thinking about, I'm exploring in my own mind my patient's capacity for hopefulness, for their goal setting. I'm exploring that, and I'm going to keep that in my mind. So I have those 4 elements, and then I really start to, these are our 5 favourite questions. There are lots of other questions that you can use. But the first thing, I think, for me, when I'm talking to a patient, and it's conversational, it's not like an interview. I'm not sitting there going, tell me about, how about, when did you? It's a conversational thing. So I might start with asking a patient to tell me about when they had their stroke, and tell me about what happened, what that was like for them. And as they're describing their experience, I'm listening to the language that they're using. So I was talking to a patient about 3 or 4 days ago, and when she was describing her stroke, she said, it was the biggest disaster of my life, and I've never recovered from it. It is going to be with me forever. So I'm really hearing in there, wow, that's somebody who's saying here and now, it's going to be with me for all of my life. Talking to another patient, it was quite significant, it was very significant, but I know that given time, this time next year, I know I'm going to be in a different place. So I'm already hearing there is the capacity there. In the second patient, he's already started to move towards the concept that there is more. So just that simple question of tell me about is a brilliant question for contextualizing how somebody experiences what's happening for them right here, right now, and the context within which they're living their stroke experience. Relevance then starts to tell us what's important to people, because we really want to understand when we're working with patients what will inspire them, what will actually get them to move. So we're talking about here what's important about. So talking to another patient. She was telling me about how she was describing a relationship, and she was describing a partner. And she said, oh, you know, Jack's been really crucial in my life. And I said, well, what has been important about your relationship with Jack? Well, he's been there when I've struggled, when I've really felt that there was no hope. And he's been the one that's really encouraged me. So what's been important about what Jack's been doing? Well, it's how he's done this, it's how he's done that, which then leads us on to process. So how specifically does he support you? And how specifically does his support enable you to have more confidence? Well, as soon as he says this, I start to smile, I start to feel better about myself, and then I know that it's possible. So we're learning, or I'm learning, that I need to do what Jack does. If I want her to move and to change, I know I need to have to model what he's doing. And then we're talking what specifically, so how specifically does Jack do that? And what specifically does he do? And the final question, which is always an interesting one, because people go, how can because be a question? Well, because gives you the why, because it's much nicer instead of saying, well, why is that important? Because some people, you know, people often find the why question quite difficult to answer. They tend to sometimes go on to feel quite self-defensive. Because is a lovely way of, well, so that's because, and people really start to open up around that feeling. So we use those 5 questions in all sorts of different ways, but we're looking specifically for those 4 elements of hope, self-efficacy, resilience, and optimism. So, hopeful. So the hopeful questions, based on those 5 questions that we've been exploring: what specifically do you want? What's important about X to you right now? What specifically can you do? You want to achieve X because, and how specifically will you measure your success? So how will you know you're doing well? And these questions really are fed into it in a conversational way.
With efficacy, how have you been successful? So exploring success in the past. So how confident are you about your capability? Or how confident are you about your potential? So really getting into what the confidence they have, maybe what the structure of that confidence is. What will you need to be successful? So helping them in a way vision what it is, where by using that question, you'd be embedding the command that they're going to be successful. So it's creating that motivational pull. So what do you need to be successful? Our relationship, well, let's put some parameters around that one. So our working relationship, what would you need from me in our work, as we work together? What will help you? What will irritate you? So what do I need to pay attention to in the way that I work with you? And how do you get in your own way? Or how could you get in your own way? So here are the opportunity to notice, get them to think about any potential sabotage that they might bring, or, you know, things that are less dramatic than sabotage. So how could you get in your own way? And then some suggestions around questions for resilience. So how realistic would that course of action would that be? What might the impact be? What's important to you? So that, again, that question, I mean, what's important really draws and can be repeated to get to the higher level of what's really important. So somebody it reveals to the patient what's going on for them and what is really important, so that they get out of the lower levels. How flexible, how adaptable, and what strategies do they have for bounce back? So maybe how have they bounced back from things before?
and mindset. So how do you see the future? How do you view what's happened? How able are you to appreciate and be grateful for? And what opportunities and challenges and difficulties. Now, the most important thing is we would never ask these questions so specifically. It's far more conversational, and it's also about listening to people's intonations. And as Sharon said earlier on, it's watching how people's facial expressions change when they talk about certain things, how their breathing patterns change, how their face colour changes, and how congruent they feel when they're describing something. Oh yeah, I'm really happy about the future. And how specifically are you happy about the future? Well, and you can start to think, there's something going on here. So we do it conversationally. And I think you're already doing all of this. We absolutely know that. But all we're introducing here, I think, is a framework for you to gather and assess someone's capacity in a more sort of sequential way, so that you've got something to look back on when you start capturing that in your notes. And for me, capturing it, when I've had a session, I'll capture it under the headings of hopeful, resilience, etc. And I'll just capture the things that I've noticed and pay attention to, and the key words that really help me understand where the patient actually, or my client actually is. Okay, so choosing a treatment option. So for me as a therapist, one of the things that I do whenever I think about any intervention or anything that I'm going to be doing with my clients or groups, I think about these four elements together. I think about the capacity that somebody has to focus, to adapt and flex. I think about which energy is available. There's a physical energy, but very little spiritual, i.e. purposeful energy available. Is the mental capacity? Is there positive emotion capacity available? What's available? What needs to be strengthened in terms of their hopefulness and the hero, and the quality and nature of the relationships that they currently have, but also the relationship they have with themselves and with me, that's going to support their journey. So I'm choosing treatment options that are also underpinned by all of these elements. So I think at that point, we'll just take a break. I think it'd be really good now to hear your thoughts and ideas, and also to take some questions and just to explore some things a bit further.
Hi, yes, we've had quite a few questions come in. I've got a lovely bright light across me.
You look like you've been blessed by light or something.
Yes, I've been blinded by the light. It's very sunny outside. So yes, we've had lots of questions come in. Just having a look through. So Amy's asking here, how do we seek to nurture the capacity for change in patients who have reduced insight, whilst also being mindful of being realistic about potential? It is these patients who often have a low resilience in regard to anything they may perceive to be critical or limiting.
Okay.
Chris,
Sharon?
yeah, so I think, so what we know, there's lots of components that make up resilience. And, you know, at another time we'll have some time to explore them. But I think there's certainly their belief that there's what their outcome, what their purpose, what they want to strive towards. But there's things like, where do they get perspective in themselves and through others? How do they pace themselves? And these, again, can all be learnt and strengthened. So when somebody's got low resilience, I think it's about exploring with them actually what they do have, and taking something at the pace that they have, bearing in mind that of course you're wanting to help them make progress, but I think there's something about joining them where they are, and pacing the journey. Would you add anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, I think the other thing is also really to model, because for many people, a lot of the clients that I've worked with, because of their life and the world that they come from. So I've worked with people who've been abused and have come from really, really traumatic experiences in their lives. They don't know how to view things in a positive way. All they know is how to protect themselves and to diss themselves. They know how to diss themselves, or they know how to diss other people. So it's patience and gentleness in actually modelling love, and I use that not in a much broader sense, that capacity to hold somebody in real compassion and care, and to notice the little things, and not when you're celebrating something, not to go, yeah, you got out of bed, that was amazing, but just to say, I just really noticed you do that, and that was really special, and something that you told me 3 weeks ago you were never going to be able to do, and you've done it. And to feel that, because when I know I'm saying that and I'm really connected to the person, I've got tears in my eyes because I'm feeling the real journey that they've been on just to do that little small thing. And I know how much it's taken and how difficult it's been. And so it's taking those small moments and helping somebody to really connect with their own positivity and to learn how to value and appreciate and celebrate themselves and their own capacity and their own courage to make the changes they want to make. So for me, I see my role as the role model who models how to do something, and also how to be realistic, and how to be saying, I know that we're never, given all of the things that have, I'll go back to, I know I've used my dad's example a lot, but I remember having conversations with my dad saying, Dad, we know that you're never actually going to be able to dig the soil again. And for him, that was huge. But what we do know is that you and I will sit out in the garden together, and you and I will hold some soil together. And that's what we're going to do. And when we did that, that was a moment that has stayed with me, 30 years on. I can still remember that connection and that moment together. And that was just as big as climbing, any mountain or doing anything, because it was so precious and important. So being alongside somebody, I think, is one of the key things that we do.
Great. Okay, so we've got another question here. I don't know who it's from. It's anonymous, but how would you document this as a patient in the client's notes? Would you be able to use this model as a guide?
I'll answer that. I do. I use it as a means of keeping my notes, because for me it helps me to think about things. So and some of you might be thinking, hope is goal setting, basically. So how do they goal set? How does the patient? And I just keep those notes. And what I do as well is I also keep notes of the words that mean something. So I know that those words are key words that when I use them with my clients, they have an impact. So I use that framework, and I know it's not a framework that you are familiar with or probably use currently, but that's how I would keep my notes around those different those four quadrants. And I'd also keep some notes about relationship as well.
So we'll move on, because I'm aware that time's getting short. Yeah. We've got a couple of questions actually. One from Derek here, and also from Debbie, sort of roughly around the same thing, about how do you flex your approach to patients who have lost the ability to speak, and what about language and cultural differences? And Debbie is saying about language also includes the intonation, non-verbal signs, and what the patient isn't saying.
Yeah. I think for me, language is also the physical. So I don't think it's just for me, it's not the words, it's the responses. So I know if somebody has got challenges with speaking, I just watch them intently, to just watch for the slightest flicker, the slightest response. So that's really important to me. And I think culturally, I've always, whenever I've worked with somebody from a culture that I've been unfamiliar with, then I've spent lots of time researching that culture and asking questions of the family and asking questions of the person themselves, so I can understand how those cultural responses work for the patient.
And I think just the things that I would add that came to mind as well from Debbie and Derek's questions is there also another way that they can communicate? So is there any signs or, you know, sort of gestures that they may be able to make? And having with a son with special learning needs, and you know, he spent I would say the first 8 years of his life not using language, but just by he did get some access to speech therapy as well. So he started to learn some signing, but he made himself very clear. And, you know, maybe patients have their alternative ways of being able to do that if they know in terms of the relationship that you'll sit and observe, and, you know, that you'll make meaning together.
Yeah, I was just thinking, actually, Sharon, we were talking about your son Luke. I remember how Luke uses music, doesn't he? Uses particular songs, and when he plays a particular song, that represents a whole set of emotions that we've over the years started to recognise and know that means that and that means that. So he uses all sorts of other things, doesn't he? And I think lots of people do, don't they? They adapt to find ways to communicate.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a question from Joe. Is this designed around a hospital setting when you are trying to plan a discharge? Hospitals are always looking for a quick turnaround and don't have so much time for this vital therapeutic relationship building approach.
Yeah, Sharon, do you want to?
Well, in a way, I saw it as out of hospital, but, you know, I realise that's an assumption in my mind. I haven't checked that out with you, Chris. What's your thinking?
I think it's something that I suppose I've always imagined that you'd use from the very first time that you ever meet somebody, that in the back of your mind, you're starting to collect information about how somebody does something. And also the relationship, and in the in-hospital relationship, I think it's also about the relationship that patients have with their family members. So when you do have a chance to spend time with them, just observing the way that they interact. So how's the family responding and how's the patient responding? So I'm just thinking of an example of a patient I was talking to a few months ago who'd had his stroke about just a few weeks before and had been discharged. But I was watching the relationship between his wife and him and how that was playing out. I was imagining that had probably begun to play out when he was in hospital. So I think for me, this model is an information collecting process. But I also recognise that in the discharge, you don't get a huge amount of time to have lots of in-depth conversations. But I'm imagining from an MDT perspective, it may be that as everybody from the team who's been working with that patient has, over the course of the time that they've been working with them, been able to collect some information. And if you're all then looking for the same things, you can then say, well, I've heard them talk about this. And somebody goes, well, I haven't heard them say that at all, but I have heard the family talk about this. So it's how you all work together, I think, to collect the information.
So we just got another 6 minutes to get through some more questions. So we've got a question here. How are you coaching counselling patients during the COVID-19 pandemic? And I think they possibly mean online.
Yeah. So I have always had a percentage of patients, clients, I should say, who I've worked with remotely. So I'm very used to setting up coaching conversations with people via video and also via phone. And I do all sorts of work that can be changing people's beliefs. It can be about enabling them to do all sorts of amazing things. So I'm very comfortable. And so for me, the pandemic has simply been, instead of doing, 50, 60%, I'm doing 100%. So, and some people haven't liked it very much, but my experience is that everybody that I've had on my client list has embraced it because they want to continue the work that they're doing.
Yes, I would say I wasn't as high as you, Chris, but certainly I have been thoroughly surprised and pleased really with the results, and it won't be going back the way that it was.
Okay, so we have a question. Would this feed into the goal setting process? I'm not sure. We've got quite a few anonymous questions. I'm not sure. Perhaps some people don't feel that they want to stick their neck out there and say who they are. So yeah, would this feed into the goal setting process?
Go on, Sharon.
Yes, definitely. So it's very much around the hope area, and what we know, from so much research is that actually when there's a goal that means something to somebody, that it's theirs, and it just it really harnesses the motivation and the movement towards something, especially if it's underpinned with a relationship that helps them take away any limiters and barriers. So maybe there's something about scaling what the steps might be, or what to make the recipe up to get there. But so definitely it's part of goal setting.
Yeah. And I would just add that I think one of the things that is really important, and Sharon sort of touched on this, is the goal is relevant to who I am and where I am in my life and where I want my life to be. So this isn't about doing 20 repetitions of an exercise. The reason I'm strengthening my hand is so that I can pick up a trowel and so that I can go and garden again. So my goal is being able to garden, and what I'm doing, everything I'm doing, is about strengthening my grip in order for me to be able to achieve something. And so I suppose the difference for me sometimes is that often in therapy it's about the number of repetitions that you do, and how you do something. And for me that's about, yes, that's the how you're going to do it, but the why you're doing it and what it is you want to be able to do at the end is more important in a patient's mind.
So we've just got time for maybe one or possibly two more questions.
Yeah.
Again, this is an anonymous question. How do you deal with a patient client that just cannot move forwards through the coaching or counselling journey after a significant life event?
I think it comes back to your compassion that you talked about, Chris.
Yeah.
And I think so an idea is potentially if there's the sharing of any stories, because what is described certainly in the psychological capital is the importance of role modelling. So whilst Chris referred to you role modelling as therapists, also what might the client, the patient, be able to draw if they hear of stories of other people that I mean, obviously with confidentiality, but other people that perhaps were presenting with whatever's going on for them and what the stories are. Because I think there's something about how we noodle stuff, when we're left just, to consider something.
And I think I'd go to the other end and say that actually one of the most important things is to honour that I may wish to live the rest of my life stuck like this, because I don't see it as stuck. I just don't believe there's anything more. And in fact, I mean, I've worked with people who, some of my clients have been suicidal, and I've actually had clients who have committed suicide, because for them, that was the way that they wanted to change their lives, because they really could not entertain the potential and possibility of anything different. So there is that compassion and that understanding, and often that, for me, that was a journey of acceptance, that I potentially wanted so much more for somebody than they wanted for themselves, and that they were where they wanted to be, or not where they wanted to be, but where they believed they could be and could only be in their lives. So I think sometimes that point when we're not, we've done so much work and we're still not making any progress, then there's the time, that's the time that I go into supervision and I reflect on, why is it that I want them to achieve it, and what is it that needs to happen for me so that I can hold a space and honour where they are.
So we're out of time, guys. So we're going to have to call a halt. So I want to say thank you very much to Christina and Sharon. It was a really informative and inspiring webinar. And just to let everybody know that if they want the slides and they want to keep in touch with us, if you join our newsletter, if you go into chat, there's a link in the top of chat to join up to our mailing list, and we will keep you in touch with future events. You can also find future events on Eventbrite like you did tonight. And yeah, do join our newsletter list, and we can keep in touch with you. Thank you so much.